I wanted to go through the NL MVP race today instead of both sides of it. You had some of the notes on with the latest going on in our MVP races, but to me, with the American League side, I think it's pretty simple. If Aaron Judge stays healthy, Aaron Judge is your 2024 NL MVP. Is that fair to say at this point?
Yeah, I think so. It's like every year with Shohei Ohtani going into the year, he's kind of the favorite. And as long as he's doing Shohei Ohtani type things, you're going to have a historic kind of year in order to bypass him for MVP, which is what happened with Aaron Judge in 2022, where you still go back and look and go, how was Shohei Ohtani not MVP? All right, well, there was somewhat of a historic season for Judge. And now Judge is in that position as the de facto MVP guy. And just with how well he's played over 2.5 months here now, not so much in that first month, but was still fine. He just wasn't Judgian, right? So you're right. It's his to lose, and that doesn't look like it's going to be happening this season.
Yeah, we'll see if at some point that race opens up. I mean, there are some great players in the American League. Bobby Witt, Gunnar Henderson, Jose Ramirez, his teammate Juan Soto. But here's Aaron Judge with 25 home runs, looking like he can push for 60 again. And that just feels like a clear finale that we're going to see here, just Judge running away with it. But in the NL side, you do have that guy, Shohei Ohtani. You do have Mookie Betts, who are leading the National League right now when it comes to wins above replacement. But it feels like it's more wide open because Ohtani is only DHing. Mookie Betts, there's now been some talk. Is he going to stay at shortstop? Is it too much for him? And all of a sudden, you're seeing some guys get into the mix. The main one, the guy that's in the picture for our thumbnail today, is Fernando Tatis Jr., a guy who gives you some really good defense, Platinum Glove winner last year, who is all of a sudden started to hit like himself. Do we buy into the hype that maybe Tatis can make a real push here and actually win the MVP this season?
Well, there's certainly more of a conversation in the National League with Fernando Tatis Jr. than I think, as you pointed out, anyone in Aaron Judge. And with the Padres playing a little bit better now and maybe breaking away just a tiny bit from that middle of the pack in the NL West of the Giants, the Diamondbacks, Tatis Jr. seems to be that guy that's leading that club now. Still incredibly young, but has taken over those reins as a leader from Manny Machado, who's a guy who goes out and posts all the time, but is he truly a leader? That still kind of remains to be seen. And I think Tatis Jr. has become that guy very much in that clubhouse, and he's been playing that much better over the last month. I think even since May 1st, he's been tops, or actually since June 1st. Fernando Tatis Jr. has been tops in terms of wins above replacement and on Fangraphs with 1.1. So just this month alone, just providing a ton of value and trying to keep the Padres in the race, not for the NL West pennant, but for one of the final wild card spots.
Yeah, you have at that same period of time, you had Tatis and Marte, who were both right atop the leaderboard there. And Ketel Marte is another guy that's leading a team in a tough race. And I think right now we feel a lot better about the Padres' chances to make the playoffs. But the Diamondbacks, they went to the World Series last year. Corbin Carroll maybe starting to turn a corner a little bit. They might just be a team that can make a push because it is so wide open in the National League. And I think when we're talking about some of these guys that we're going to go through that have a chance to get into this race, the team part of it could be a huge component. There's a lot of Dodgers, and I think in some ways that could hurt them all in the voting process if there is a clear Tatis led the Padres to 90 wins and they made the playoffs. And he's also a guy in Tatis that, like, we could see the month where he hits 10 bombs in a month and steals that many bases. He's playing great. Like, the ability to really add the stats, I think, is something that makes Tatis a real candidate. Marte, I'm still curious if he could put together enough of those stats by the end of the year to really be an MVP candidate. But for now, you got to look at where he's at and say, yeah, he is in the running at this moment.
Yeah, Marte is such an undervalued player, and I think the entire baseball world got to see that last October with him leading the Arizona Diamondbacks and going on an incredible run, a hitting streak, right? Just getting on base all the time and being in the middle of absolutely everything. So he deserves to be in that conversation, but he is obviously further back in the pack with some of those other NLS guys. But the narrative is there for Fernando Tatis Jr. to be that MVP. You could make the case that the players for the Dodgers, well, they're going to split votes or they have one another. So they can only provide so much value. And then Fernando Tatis Jr. for, as you said, going out, having a 10 plus homer month, maybe having a couple of those and doing it through a marine layer in San Diego and leading this organization to a postseason appearance, which is somewhat of a rarity for them, despite all the expectations. And if it really becomes the one that leads that club to some October play, he can get a lot of that credit because it seems like they've been this roster where everyone's been expecting it to happen and it just hasn't clicked. And if he becomes the guy that, if the narrative becomes about him, then yes, I very much think he could end up stealing some votes and it becomes more of a Fernando Tatis Jr. show. So he's got a way to go. He still has the entire second half, but he definitely belongs in the mix, in that conversation for guys who could be there at the end of the season.
He does for sure. There's certain guys that we look at that have the ability to play like the best player in baseball. And this is no shot at Ketel Marte, but even though some of the stats can be there, the WAR total could kind of jump out. I don't view him as one of those guys. And so Tatis, we always know it's been in there. I think the interesting part about his case is going to be, can he get voters on his side? Like, is he far enough from the steroid thing to now be like, all right, well, he's been playing clearly without it. He's testing fine, and he had a great season last year. But it was the glove that really stood out. His bat was good, but he wasn't pre-suspension Tatis last year, and he didn't start this year as pre-suspension Tatis. Now it seems like he might be that guy again, which is awesome to see because baseball is better when you have this guy going. And another guy that's similar to that I think has the ability to go on an incredible tear in the second half and win an MVP is a guy that's done it multiple times, and that's Bryce Harper for me. I mean, a lot of times you talk about the best player on the best team. If the Phillies win 110 plus games here, which is still a possibility, and Bryce Harper finishes the year with 40 bombs and really puts up some crazy numbers offensively, not to mention turning himself into a potential Gold Glove first baseman. I don't know if he's going to win that, but he's the type of guy that I could see getting a lot of votes in that award as well, just because he's Bryce Harper and because there's been great improvements in his first full season there. I think Harper's a guy we have to mention in this NL MVP race.
There are just certain Hall of Fame elite type players that when they are having a career type season, and there are other factors surrounding that player's year, that they become the front runner. And I think Harper, you're right. I think you can probably make the case a little easier for Harper winning the NL MVP this year than Tatis Jr. because I think it really will take the Padres winning the NL West in order for someone like Tatis to win it, right? Unless he happens to have just an otherworldly season. Harper can be just as good as that, maybe even a tick below, but get all of that credit for the Phillies being able to snap the Atlanta streak. And he is that guy at the center of that organization. Whereas Atlanta, even if they make the postseason, you know that's going to be a team effort with their best pitcher and Strider out, with their best hitter in Ronald Acuna Jr. out. So the Phillies getting it done and doing it with Bryce Harper. And sure, it's now a year after he's changed position, but that is still such a huge undertaking to think about a guy who had 5+ starts in the outfield is now a first baseman. And we're seeing that also in Los Angeles with a guy who had started many games in the outfield, Mookie Betts, going to the dirt and being a shortstop at a really high level. So, I think Harper, you could probably make that case maybe even a little bit better than Fernando Tatis Jr. But the numbers and a first place finish in the division, I think, are sort of paramount to anything else.
Yeah, I mean, Harper, we've seen him do it before. This guy's already won 2 MVPs, and I don't think anyone would be surprised if he finished his career as a 4-time MVP. So, like, I could say, all right, at some point in the next decade that he's got left, he might win 2 more. This could be one of those years that he does it. You mentioned the Braves in there, and I just thought it was interesting to bring this guy up because I wrote an article that I think we talked about already, but just about how this Braves team, at what point do we stop giving them the benefit of the doubt was the point of the article. And I talked about all these guys that are struggling. There's one guy that's not struggling, and I could never see him getting voters interested in him for an award like this. But at some point, if Marcell Ozuna continues to do what he's doing, because he's leading the National League in home runs, he's leading the National League in RBIs, He's not quite a rise, but he's right there. Rise at 326 for batting average. Ozuna at 322. On base percentage 396. Slug 604. He's got the best WRC plus in the National League. Marcell Ozuna as a DH at a 2.6 F4, not far off from Ohtani. I'm just saying, if the Braves, let's say the Braves stole this division back, and which I can't imagine, but like because it has to be that overwhelming, right? For Ozuna with his track record off the field to get voter love. I just like I still can't imagine voters ever actually giving this guy something like that. But if he hits 45 home runs and he's at 57 RBIs already, he drives in, who knows, 130, whatever crazy number it ends at. Do we have to at least mention Ozuna? I guess I just did, but it is worth, I think, noting.
You just basically turned everybody into someone who's rooting against Atlanta now, because
that's the goal. I'm a Mets fan, so I'm trying to do.
There you go. You're right. I think it would take Atlanta having to win the division, because for Marcell Ozuna to possibly win this award, basically because he loses every tiebreaker. Like Mookie Betts wins every tiebreaker, moving over to shortstop, playing at a high level. Even if they end up the Dodgers end up acquiring someone like a Bo Bichette and he slides over to second base, that is still incredible. It's still impressive. He still did what he did over the first 2+ months of the season. You can't take that away from him. Ohtani also loses some tiebreakers because he's a DH only, which is a rarity. And I think Marcell Ozuna is another player that is going to be losing a lot of tiebreakers. So it would require Atlanta winning this division in the NL East. But even still, if he's continuing to play as consistently as he's been, that the narrative can very easily be spun into, well, all of a sudden, Ozzie Albies has now stepped up as the leadoff hitter, and he's had 6 leadoff home runs this season, and his power numbers are now back up to the 30 homer level that we saw from a few years ago. All those things, and you could say, oh yeah, he's the reason why they've gotten there, and so that will steal some of the shine. So there's such a slim chance, and I'm glad that we don't really live in that world, because there's no way that's going to happen. But you know what? If the numbers are there, he'll still get some MVP love, right? But it'll be, all right, lose a tiebreaker, and he could have some of those numbers of, hey, how many guys with 40 homers and 140 RBI finished outside the top 5? Might be a rarity, and Marcell Ozuna might be at the top of that list.
It's so hard to put guys like this in the specific bucket and try to still just ignore what we know and focus on performance. But if we do focus on performance, the guy is worth mentioning. He's been ridiculous. And I just want to throw a couple more names out there, and then I have another question to kind of close off this topic. But Willy Adames, you talked about underrated with Ketel Marte. Willy Adames, I've been doing a lot of sort of looking ahead at the free agent class coming up. And it's all right, it's Juan Soto, it's Pete Alonso, and then there's not a lot else. And you almost forget about Willy Adames. He's an underrated free agent. He's having a great start to his season. He's been a huge catalyst. I think he's now leading the Brewers in F4 ahead of William Contreras. But Adames really doing well. And it's an interesting conversation, because before the season, we would have said, oh, they're going to trade Adames at the deadline. They might do the Josh Hader thing again. He's going to be a free agent. They'll slide Joey Ortiz to shortstop, and they'll just remove him. I think they've learned their lesson on how that can crater your season when you remove a leader from your clubhouse, particularly Adames, who feels like even more of a leader as an everyday guy than a Hader was. So I think Adames has hit himself on the Brewers for the rest of the season at least, but he's just worth mentioning. I don't think he's going to win it, but he is having a really good start to his season.
It initially, my thought was that Marte would lead someone like Adames, because I feel like Marte's been more recently in the conversation as being that leader based off of everything we saw last postseason. But what's interesting is that in 2021, the first year that Adames got traded over to Milwaukee, didn't even spend a full year in the National League. He still got some MVP votes. So, there are voters obviously out there that recognize how good his value is. And it's interesting, because I think it was this offseason, it was said by some prominent baseball writers that there very much is like this groupthink that happens for a lot of these end of the year award voting, and there's more unanimous winners of awards, and people kind of vote in the same way, whether or not it's just looking at wins above replacement. It's just there again, it becomes a conversation around certain players and certain situations, and everyone is just on the same page, and maybe people aren't thinking as independently as before. So it does take, I think, a little outside the box thinking, like you're doing here now, of like, well, you know what, this guy deserves some credit, right? He's not getting talked about. We love talking about underrated players. We love talking about guys that maybe don't get enough credit, that are putting up big numbers, right? We were early into the conversation all about Kyle Tucker, so it makes sense that this tape is going to age well, right? You talking about Willy Adames. I think it was last week you were talking about something in regards to Atlanta maybe making the postseason that could end up aging really well, because things don't just always line up the way we think they are. Like, we did just get done saying Judge is probably a lock for MVP, but we know it's not totally done. We're going through the exercise each and every week of, but has somebody else injected themselves into the conversation? If not, then we don't talk about it. But if they have, and they deserve that credit, they deserve to get that credit. So Willy Adames, I think, is a great call for the Brewers right now.
That's why we play all the games, right? Because Aaron Judge, he slumped at the beginning of the season. He can do that again. And we might be saying, oh, wow, Gunnar Henderson is now all of a sudden leading the American League in home runs. I don't expect that to happen as I'm recording this today in the middle of June. But in the middle of July, it might be a completely different story. And I was sort of looking at, all right, if the voting happened today, like who would be top 10 MVP finishers? We talked about a lot of them. Jurickson Profar is just funny to mention because he's at a 2.7 F4. Like, in what world would we have expected Jurickson Profar to be rubbing shoulders with Bryce Harper and be better than Freddie Freeman at this point of the season? But he has been when it comes to WAR. Contreras along with Adames. For the Brewers, worth mentioning, Ellie De La Cruz, a guy that can really rack up WAR quickly. And then you have all the Dodgers. And that's what I want to kind of close this topic with.